In this chapter, we're going to learn about joints, which are also known as articulations. This is where a bone connects to something else. And there's three possibilities for what that bone can connect to. It can connect to another bone, to cartilage, or a tooth. And you have many joints in the body, and we classify these joints. And they're classified based on two criteria: their structure and their function. So first we're going to go through and look at the structural classifications. Then when we have that done, we're going to add the functional classifications. So your page in your binder is sideways because this is kind of a chart to group out all the different types of joints. So we're going to start with the first one here is the fibrous joint. So this is our first structural classification, is fibrous. Fibrous joints are made of dense, irregular connective tissue. This should be familiar to you from the skin. You have dense, irregular connective tissue in the dermis of your skin. And fibrous joints have no cavity. A cavity is an empty space. So if a joint has a cavity, that means there's a little gap between the bone and what it's connecting to. If there's no cavity, there's no cap. They're just pressed right together. Our next type is the cartilaginous. So these are made of cartilage. And they also have no cavity. And the third one is synovial. Synovial joints are complex joints with many different types of tissues. And these joints do have a cavity. Each of these is subdivided up into more types. So if we go back to the fibrous, you can see we have three different types of fibrous joints. The first one is gomphosis. And this is the joint that holds your teeth into your jaw. Next is the suture. And this is where two bones are kind of fused together. And this would be like, for example, your skull. In a baby, the skull bones are separate from each other and they can actually move. That's how babies have that cone head when they're born. As you mature, those skull bones suture together and then they no longer move. So by the time you're an adult, your skull bones can't move. And the third one is syndesmosis. This is when two bones are connected along their length. So there's this sheet of tissue here between these bones that is called an interosseous membrane. Normally, we think of a joint as being at the end of the bone, but in this case, the joint is along the length of a bone. So a syndesmosis joins bones along their length. And it's an interosseous membrane that holds them together. So now, if you think for a minute, think about areas of the body where you would have two bones running next to each other like this. This is found in your arm and your leg. It's in your forearm, where it holds the radius and ulna together. And it's in your leg, where it holds the tibia and fibula together. Then we can go back to cartilaginous. They are split into two types based on which type of cartilage. So we have synchondrosis. These are made of hyaline cartilage. A couple of examples would be the epiphyseal plate. Remember, we just learned about the epiphyseal plate, and remember zone 1 is that zone of resting cartilage where it holds the epiphysis to the rest of the bone. So zone 1 of the epiphyseal plate is an example of this. Also in the rib cage, remember it goes rib, cartilage, sternum. So you have your ribs here, you have your costal cartilage here, and then you have your sternum. Right here where the ribs connect to the cartilage, that is a synchondrosis. Then the other type of cartilaginous joint is a symphysis. These are made of fibrocartilage. And a couple of examples. One is in the hip. So you have a right hip and you have a left hip. And right here in the front, they are connected to each other by the pubic symphysis. Then in your back, you have intervertebral disc between each of your vertebrae. Those are a type of symphysis joint. Then we can go to synovial, and we'll look at all the types of synovial joints. So there's a lot of types here, so we're going to make another chart underneath this picture. Synovial joints can be split out based on how many directions or planes of movement, they allow. So we're going to have uniaxial. They move in one direction, or one plane of movement. We're going to have biaxial. They move in two directions. And we're going to have multiaxial. They move in many directions. Then under each of these, we're going to have some types. So for uniaxial, we're going to have 3 uniaxial joints. There is the plane joint. And right up here, this one is the plane joint. Okay, so an example of the plane joint is in your wrist. Now, your wrist can move in many different directions, right? You can sit here right now and move your wrist. You can make circles. You can move it forward, backward, side to side. The reason is because there's 8 bones in the wrist. So you have multiple joints there. Each joint moves one direction, but you have 8 different bones there. So that's how you get the different directions of movement in the wrist. Then we have pivot. Well, think about it, you probably know what pivot means. Pivot is to turn. This is in your head. So this one is the pivot. You can shake your head no because of the pivot joint. And this is, here's your atlas. C1 is the atlas. Here is C2, the axis, because the atlas pivots on the axis. And that is how you turn your head. Then our third uniaxial is the hinge. So just think of like a hinge on a door, right? So here we have the elbow as an example of a hinge. The knee is the other major hinge in the body. Then we can move on to biaxial. These move in two directions. These are found in your hand. So we have the saddle joint, which is right here. This is your thumb. And we have the condylar, which is in your fingers. So this one is the condylar. So these move in two directions. Here's some pictures to show you. Your fingers, you can extend and flex. Think of like how a little kid waves goodbye, or you're grasping something in your fingers. You can also abduct and adduct. Right? So you can spread your fingers out, you can bring them back together. That's the two directions of movement you can do with your fingers and your thumb. Then multiaxial, there's only one type of multiaxial, and that is the ball and socket. So this joint is named because of the way the two bones fit together. One bone forms kind of a socket, like a hollow open area or a little cave. The other bone has a ball that fits into that. And this would be the hip and the shoulder. So here is the ball and socket. So you have the head of the femur is a ball and it fits into a socket in the hip. Okay, so that's the structures. Now let's look at function. When we classify joints by function, it is degree of movement. So we want to know how much, if any, movement that the joint allows. So we have three different categories for this. You can have synarthrosis. Syn means together. So synarthrosis, the bone and what it's connected to stay together, so there is no movement. Then we have amphiarthrosis. Okay, remember before we had amphipathic molecules, where that was a molecule such as soap, bile, where part of it bonds with water, part of it bonds with lipid? Amphi means partial. So amphiarthrosis has slight movement. Then we have diarthrosis. Diarthrosis has full movement, or it can sometimes be called freely movable. Okay, and notice the colors I used, red, yellow, green. All right, red for no movement, stop, yellow for some movement, and green for go ahead and have full movement. So now we can go back up to all of our types of joints we already labeled and give them their functional classification, if they're synarthrosis, amphiarthrosis, or diarthrosis. All right, so if we think about the gomphosis, your teeth don't move. They stay set in your jaw. So that is a synarthrosis. The same with your skull. Your skull bones are not moving around. They are staying set. So suture is also synarthrosis. The syndesmosis has a little bit of movement. In lab, you're going to do different movements. You're going to do supination and pronation, and you're going to see that those radius and ulna do move a little bit on each other. They kind of twist on each other. The same with your tibia and fibula. You can, if you're standing up, point your toes forward, move your toes out to the side. So there is a little bit of movement there. Then with the cartilaginous joints, syncardrosis has no movement. So this is synarthrosis for both types. And one thing to point out here in your rib cage, your chest does have to rise and fall in order to breathe. So you do need movement in your chest. Where the cartilage attaches to the sternum, that's where you have diarthrosis. So you have ribs to cartilage, then cartilage to sternum. Where the ribs attach to the cartilage, there's no movement. But where the cartilage attaches to the sternum, there is movement. So that movement that occurs to allow you to breathe is there where the cartilage attaches to the sternum. Symphysis is an amphiarthrosis. There's a little bit of movement. So think about your back, right? You can bend your back. Now, you can bend your back quite a bit. You have a lot of movement there, but that's because you have multiple intervertebral discs. Each one moves a little bit, and the combination of them allows you to move your back a lot. And the hips do have a little bit of give, and that's important in childbirth to have that little bit of movement in the hips. Then the synovial. Notice I did the synovial in green and I did diarthrosis in green. That's because all synovial are diarthrosis and all diarthrosis are synovial. Notice we didn't use diarthrosis on anything else. And here where I put diarthrosis in the rib cage, that's because that's a synovial joint. The joint between the cartilage and the sternum is synovial. So diarthrosis and synovial always go together. Anytime you're told a joint is synovial, you can also know it's diarthrosis. And anytime this joint is diarthrosis, you also know it's synovial. All right, so there's an overview of the different types of joints in the body. Now let's start looking a little more at function. So on this page, we're just going to focus on synovial joints. All right, so notice here, everything we say from here on out applies only to synovial joints. Synovial joints are the ones that move. And when you have movement, you get problems. So synovial joints move, and movement creates problems. All right, a lot of physiology is about learning problems and solutions. So whenever you have a problem, your body needs a solution to the problem. So we're going to look at synovial joints. We're going to see what kind of problems they face due to their movement, and then we're going to see how they deal with those problems. So we're going to have 3 different problems. Whenever you have movement, you get friction. So friction is a problem that occurs in synovial joints. Also, because of this movement, you have impact. Right? Think about walking, running, jumping. You're putting a lot of force and impact on your joints. And due to all this moving around and such, you get instability. It can be hard to hold the joints together because when you're moving, they could come out of socket or come out of their joint, dislocate. So we'll look at the solutions to this. For friction, one solution you have is your articular cartilage. So here you can see on the ends of the bones, you have this cartilage that coats the ends of the bones. You can see it here. In all of these joints, you have cartilage coating the ends of the bones. And here you can see it in this one. That is articular cartilage. And this is made of hyaline cartilage. So articular refers to the location. Articular cartilage means that it coats the ends of the bones. Hyaline is what it's made of. So it is made of hyaline cartilage. And hyaline cartilage is very smooth. Your book describes it as glassy. It's smooth and slick. So that reduces friction. And just to label these joints for you, this is just a generic joint. It's not any particular joint in the body. This is a side view of a knee. This is the hip, and this is the shoulder. All right, so then back to friction. So you have this smooth cartilage coating the ends of the bones to reduce friction. You also have synovial fluid. So we have this area, this is the cavity. The joint cavity is filled with synovial fluid, and that fluid flows all the way around. Remember, synovial joints have a cavity, and that cavity is filled with synovial fluid. And this is an oily fluid, so it lubricates the joint. Then a third thing you have to deal with friction is bursa. Okay, these are a side view of the bursa, but all of these blue things here, and here, these are bursa. Bursa are found in points in a joint that have particularly high friction, and a bursa is a sac of synovial fluid. You can see here's another one in the shoulder. So a bursa is just a sac of synovial fluid. And they're not found everywhere. They're just found at points that have particularly high friction. Okay, now let's move on and look at impact. So you have a lot of force on your joints every time you move, and you need something to cushion. So some of these things serve double duty. Your articular cartilage. Okay, it's not only smooth to reduce friction, it also cushions. Also the synovial fluid. Think about if you're in the swimming pool and you're underwater and you try to punch somebody. You can't really punch somebody underwater. The water is a cushion. It's the same in your joints. You have all this fluid in your joints, and that cushions so the bones don't hit together so hard. Some joints have fat pads, and you can see this in the knee right here. There's a glob of fat. So you have fat pads in some joints to help cushion them. Fat's very soft and cushiony. And in your knee, so only in your knee, you have menisci. You may have heard of like the meniscus of your knee. So menisci is plural, meniscus is singular. And remember, these are not found everywhere in the body. Only your knee has menisci. So you can see them right here. This is one, and this is one. Each knee has 2 menisci in it. And these are fibrocartilage pads that cushion. So all of your synovial joints have hyaline cartilage because that's what coats the ends of the bones. And some of your joints also have fibrocartilage in them. So fibrocartilage forms the menisci of your knees. Then let's look at instability. So joints dislocate, right? People go to the hospital all the time with a dislocated joint, but your body does try to prevent this. So one thing you have that prevents this is muscles and tendons. And if you've ever dislocated a joint and you go to the doctor, they give you muscle relaxers because a lot of the pain is your muscle spazzing, trying to pull the joint back into place. So muscles will do a lot to hold joints in place. So here you can see, here's an example of a muscle in your shoulder joint. And then here is the tendon. So you can see how the muscle and its tendon cross the joint, and that helps hold the joint together. You have an articular capsule. So we can see that back here. This structure here, and now this is a cross-section view, it actually wraps all the way around 360 degrees. This is connective tissue that wraps around the joint. And the inner layer, you can kind of see this like purple part here. The inner layer of the articular capsule is what makes synovial fluid. So the articular capsule is connective tissue that wraps around the joint. And it also makes synovial fluid. Another thing that helps hold joints together is ligaments. So the difference between a tendon and a ligament is whether or not it attaches to a muscle. A tendon is attached to a muscle. A ligament just goes bone to bone. So like you can see, here's an example of a ligament. Here's another ligament. There's no muscle there. It's just bone to bone. So a ligament is a strap of dense, regular connective tissue that attaches bone to bone. And then the fourth thing here, which is found just in the shoulder and the hip, So this is another thing like the meniscus. Not all joints have it, but in your shoulder and your hip, you have a labrum. So remember, these are the ball and socket joints. So the labrum is a piece of cartilage that lines the socket. And it helps hold the head of the other bone in place. So here in the shoulder, see these little points sticking out here? That's your labrum. It's these little pieces of cartilage that are sticking out from the socket and helping to hold the head of the humerus in place. And here in the hip, you have the labrum would be here like this. It's a piece of cartilage that lines the socket and it helps hold the head of the femur in place. So that's some important features of synovial joints, how they solve the problems that they get from being so mobile. So one last thing here to look at with your joints is one is about cracking knuckles, because people ask about that a lot, and then also about arthritis. So if first we talk about cracking knuckles. Cracking knuckles does not cause arthritis. So that is just kind of an old myth. You're not going to get arthritis from cracking your knuckles. The only damage it can do is if you do it a lot, you can eventually make your ligaments loose and make your joints more likely to dislocate, but it takes a lot of cracking to get to that point. So for the most part, it's harmless. The reason your knuckles crack, remember you have synovial fluid. And synovial fluid contains nitrogen. So you have to think back to physics. Think about what you learned about in physics in junior high or high school. You have gases and liquids, right? Something can go back and forth between being a gas and a liquid. And temperature and pressure determine if it's a gas or a liquid. So at body temperature, nitrogen is kind of right on the fence between being a gas or a liquid. And if your body were a little hotter, the nitrogen would definitely be gas. If the body were a little colder, the nitrogen would definitely be liquid. But you're right on the fence there, body temperature. So now we look at pressure. If you have high pressure, you can make it into a liquid. If you have low pressure, you can make it into a gas. When you pull on a joint, you release pressure. Pulling on the joint makes the joint cavity bigger. And if you make a space bigger, there's less pressure in that space. So when you pull a joint, you make the cavity bigger. This decreases the pressure in the joint. And now because you decrease the pressure, the nitrogen becomes gas. So the nitrogen of the synovial fluid becomes gas. And now when you have a gas and a fluid, it makes bubbles, and bubbles pop. And the sound of those nitrogen bubbles popping is what you hear as your knuckles cracking. Okay, then let's look at arthritis. Arthritis deals with the articular cartilage. So remember we have here this articular cartilage coating the ends of the bones. And that's to lubricate and cushion. Arthritis is when something happens to damage that cartilage. So it's either damaged or it's not there anymore. So if you damage or you lose your articular cartilage, you lose that friction or you lose that lubrication and that cushioning. And then you have pain and friction because you have bone rubbing against bone. So then you get pain as the bone rubs against bone. And there are two main types of arthritis. There's rheumatoid arthritis and osteoarthritis. Rheumatoid arthritis has nothing to do with age. We think of arthritis as happening in older people, but rheumatoid can occur at any age. There's even juvenile rheumatoid arthritis that can occur in children. This is an autoimmune disease. Okay, so auto means self. Your immune system is supposed to protect you from diseases. Autoimmune is when your immune system messes up and it attacks yourself. So it is your own immune system that attacks your articular cartilage. So that's why your articular cartilage is damaged and destroyed, because your immune system is treating it like an infection and killing it and attacking it. The other type is osteoarthritis. This is where your articular cartilage wears out as you get older. So this is the one that we associate with older people. It's just eventually that cartilage wears out. This can be prevented with exercise. You may have seen commercials for joint medications and it says like the best prevention of arthritis is staying active. So regular exercise can help prevent osteoarthritis. So I'm going to explain how exercise prevents osteoarthritis. You have blood vessels that come as far as the articular capsule. There are no blood vessels inside the joint. So this is a blood vessel here. So there is no blood in the joint. Your articular cartilage is living tissue. It has cells that need nutrients and oxygen and that produce waste. So you do have living cells here. Right? Cartilage is a living tissue. So as a living tissue, it needs oxygen and nutrients. and it produces waste. Normally, blood takes care of this. Blood is what gives oxygen and nutrients to your tissues and removes their waste. But there's no blood going to that articular cartilage. So you use synovial fluid as the middleman. Remember, this cavity is filled with synovial fluid. This fluid has access to the blood, so the fluid can come here. It can get nutrients and oxygen from the blood. Then the fluid can pass that nutrients and oxygen to the cartilage. And as the cartilage makes waste, that waste is put into the synovial fluid. And then the synovial fluid can distribute that waste to the blood. So synovial fluid is the middleman. So it gets oxygen and nutrients from the blood. And gives to the cartilage. And then it also picks up the waste from the cartilage and takes it to the blood. So in order for synovial fluid to do this effectively, it has to circulate. You need that fluid to be moving around. If the fluid is stagnant, if it's not moving, you'd have a bunch of oxygen and nutrients sitting here, but they would just be sitting there. And you would have a bunch of waste here, but it would just sit there. You need the fluid to slosh around in order to distribute back and forth between the cartilage and the blood. And that's what exercise does. Exercise makes that fluid slosh around and move around so that it can distribute the things back and forth between the cartilage and the blood. So when you exercise, you make that fluid slosh around and move. And if the fluid's moving, it can distribute between the cartilage and the blood. If you don't exercise, if you are sedentary, then that fluid is stagnant. So the waste is going into the fluid, but it's just sitting there. It's not being taken to the blood. And so waste will build up. And then you will actually poison the cells from their own waste. Imagine like if your toilet was clogged up and you couldn't flush it, and you were just like trapped in the bathroom with a toilet that doesn't flush. Eventually you'd be poisoned by your own waste. It's the same idea here. The waste will build up and it will just poison the cells. And then the cartilage dies. And if the cartilage dies because it's being poisoned by its own waste, then you get osteoarthritis.